I came home from my 2-week work assignment on a Tuesday afternoon. My suitcase was still in my hand when I found the padlock. It was bright orange, the kind contractors use, clamped across the front door of my grandmother Dolores's house. My house. The one she left me in her will 3 years ago. I stood on the porch in the October cold and just stared at it. I did not cry. I pulled out my phone and started taking photographs. I had inherited that house when I was 31. Dolores raised me in it after my parents' marriage collapsed. She taught me how to pay bills, how to save money, how to stand without leaning on anyone. When she died, the house passed to me free and clear. No mortgage, no liens. It was the only thing in my entire life that had ever been fully, unconditionally mine. Now there was a padlock on it and a laminated notice from a real estate development company taped to the door. The notice said the property had been purchased by Hargrove Development Group on October 3rd. I checked my phone. It was October 14th. I had been in Cincinnati for 2 weeks running a title audit for my company. My father, Warren Merritt, had sold my house while I was gone. I read the notice 4 times. Then I sat down on the porch steps in the cold and forced myself to breathe slowly. I needed to think clearly. Anger was not a plan. I called Marcus Webb from the porch steps. Marcus was my closest friend and a paralegal at a real estate law firm downtown. I had known him since we were 22. He answered on the second ring, and I told him everything in 3 sentences. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't go inside. Don't call your father yet. Come to my office right now and bring every photograph you just took." I stood up, picked up my suitcase, and walked to my car. At Marcus's office, we pulled the public deed records together. Someone had filed a power of attorney document, supposedly signed by me, granting Warren Merritt authority to sell the property on my behalf. The notary stamp belonged to a woman named Cheryl Potts. I had never met Cheryl Potts. I had certainly never signed any power of attorney. My signature on that document was a forgery. Marcus printed everything without a word. His jaw was tight the entire time. I worked in title insurance. I had spent 9 years catching exactly this kind of fraud for other people's properties. I knew the mechanics of deed fraud better than most attorneys. I knew what a forged POA looked like. I knew how to unwind one. And I knew that if I called Warren right now, screaming, I would give him time to move money and destroy evidence. So I did not call him. I drove home to my apartment, made tea I did not drink, and wrote down everything I remembered. Warren had been borrowing money from me for 2 years. Small amounts at first, $300 here, $500 there. Then larger. He had lost his job at a logistics company in the spring and met Trisha Colton sometime after. Trisha was 38, Warren was 61, and he seemed to reorganize his entire personality around impressing her. I had noticed, but said nothing. I had drawn a line at lending him money, and I thought that was enough. I was wrong about what he was capable of. The next morning, I called attorney Diane Cho. Diane specialized in property fraud recovery, and Marcus had worked with her before. I laid out the timeline clearly: Dolores's will, the inheritance, my 2-week absence, the forged POA, the sale to Hargrove. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "We file a lease pendens today. That freezes the title. Hargrove cannot develop or resell until this is resolved." She paused. "Do you know where the sale proceeds went?" I said I was working on that. "I found out where the money went from my cousin Patrice." She called me that evening, nervous and whispering, as though Warren might hear her through the phone. The sale had netted $310,000. Warren had used $200,000 to pay off personal debts, credit cards, a personal loan, and a balance owed to a car dealership. The remaining $110,000 had gone toward a wedding. Warren and Trisha were getting married in 3 weeks at the Lakewood Banquet Hall. I sat with that information for a long time. He had sold my grandmother's house to throw a wedding. The house where Dolores taught me to cook Sunday dinners. The house where I slept on a pull-out sofa the winter my mother moved away. The house with the rose garden Dolores kept going for 40 years. He sold it for a wedding and a clean credit score. I was not surprised exactly, but something in me went very still, the way things go still right before they break completely. Diane filed the lease pendens on October 15th. She also filed a fraud complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office and submitted a notary misconduct report against Cheryl Potts. The state title examiner opened an investigation the same week. Hargrove Development's attorneys received notice that the transaction was legally contested. Their closing attorney, according to Diane, called the situation a serious exposure. None of this was visible to Warren yet. He was planning a wedding. I was building a case. My Aunt Beverly called on October 18th. Warren had told the entire family that I agreed to sell the house and wanted to help him start fresh. He had framed it as a gift. Beverly said she was proud of me for being the bigger person. I thanked her quietly and said nothing else. I did not correct her. I did not want anyone warning Warren before Diane was ready. It cost me something, staying silent while my family praised me for something I never chose. But I stayed silent. Marcus found Cheryl Potts through a notary registration database. She was a part-time bookkeeper who notarized documents out of her kitchen. When Marcus contacted her firm under the guise of a title routine check, her supervising attorney called Diane within 48 hours. Cheryl had notarized the POA after Warren gave her $400 in cash. She had not witnessed my signature. She had not verified my identity. She had simply stamped it. She was now facing notary fraud charges and was cooperating fully with investigators. On October 21st, Warren called me. His voice was warm, careful. He asked how Cincinnati had gone, whether I was settling back in. I told him everything was fine. I asked about his plans and he said things were coming together beautifully. He did not mention the house. I did not mention the house. We talked for 6 minutes about nothing, and then I said I had to get back to work. When I hung up, my hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear. From the effort of staying perfectly, deliberately calm. Diane sent me her legal summary on October 23rd. The forged POA was invalid under Ohio law, which meant the deed transfer to Hargrove was void. The sale had never been legal. The property still belonged to me. Hargrove's attorneys had already begun negotiating a mutual rescission. They wanted out of the fraudulent transaction cleanly. The civil asset freeze on Warren's accounts was approved by the court on October 24th. The wedding was scheduled for October 28th. 4 days away. I did not go to the wedding to make a scene. I want to be clear about that. I went because Patrice begged me to come, because she was scared of what might happen if I wasn't there in person, and because Diane told me that a process server needed to reach Warren that evening with the civil lawsuit paperwork. I wore a dark green dress. I did my hair. I arrived at the Lakewood Banquet Hall at 6:45, 15 minutes before the reception began, and I found a seat near the back. Warren saw me from across the room and went pale. He crossed the floor quickly, smiling in a way that did not reach his eyes, and put his hand on my arm. He said he was glad I came. He said we could talk later. I smiled back and said there was no rush. Trisha spotted us and waved from near the bar. She had no idea who I was or what was coming. The banquet hall was full of white flowers and rented chandeliers and people who believed this was a celebration. The process server arrived at 7:15 during cocktail hour. He was quiet and professional. He located Warren near the gift table, handed him the envelope, and said the words required by law. Warren opened it right there. I watched his face move through confusion, then recognition, then something that looked very much like collapse. Trisha appeared at his elbow and asked what was wrong. Warren looked across the room at me. I held his gaze. I did not look away. I did not smile. I just looked at him steadily. Trisha read the first page of the lawsuit. Then she read it again. Her expression changed completely. She grabbed Warren's arm and pulled him toward the hallway. Several guests noticed. Conversations dropped in volume. Patrice appeared beside me and gripped my hand under the table. I heard Trisha's voice rise from the hallway, not the words, just the tone. Sharp and ascending. Warren's voice was lower, faster. The white flowers and rented chandeliers suddenly looked like a set for a play that had just lost its ending. Diane had advised me to say nothing confrontational that night. I followed her advice completely. When Warren came back to the room and walked toward me, I simply stood up, smoothed my dress, and said, "My attorney will be in touch, Dad." Those were the only words I said to him all evening. Then I hugged Patrice, picked up my coat, and walked out of the Lakewood Banquet Hall through the front doors into the cold October night. I drove home and slept better than I had in weeks. The mutual rescission between Diane and Hargrove's attorneys was finalized on November 7th. Hargrove recovered their purchase funds through Warren's frozen accounts, and the transaction was legally unwound. The deed was restored to my name. The Ohio Attorney General's office filed criminal charges against Warren on November 12th, 1 count of deed fraud, 1 count of elder estate fraud, and 1 count of forgery. Cheryl Potts received a separate criminal referral. Warren hired an attorney and stopped calling me. Trisha, I was told by Patrice, moved out. Beverly called me after the charges were announced. She cried and said she had no idea. I believed her. She asked me why I hadn't told her what was happening. I told her honestly, because I needed everyone to stay calm long enough for the law to work. She was quiet for a while. Then she said she was sorry. Not for what Warren did, exactly, but for praising me for something I never agreed to. That apology was small, but it mattered more than I expected it to. I moved back into Dolores's house in November. The padlock was gone. I had the locks changed and the porch light replaced. I stood in the kitchen the first evening and just breathed. The rose garden in the back was overgrown from neglect. I planned to fix that in spring. I cooked a simple dinner, the Sunday pot roast Dolores had taught me, and ate it alone at her old wooden table. I did not feel victorious. I felt returned. Like something stolen had simply come back to where it belonged. Marcus came by on a Saturday with coffee and helped me sort through some of Dolores's things I had boxed before my Cincinnati trip. We did not talk much about Warren. We talked about the rose garden, about what color to paint the porch, about whether the old radiators needed replacing. It was ordinary conversation, and it felt like the most generous thing anyone had ever offered me. He stayed until evening. When he left, he said, "She'd be glad you fought for it." He was right. I knew he was right. Warren's criminal case was still moving through the courts when spring arrived. I planted new roses along the back fence, deep red, the kind Dolores always preferred. I had not spoken to my father since the banquet hall. I did not know if I ever would again. What I knew was this: my grandmother built something real and true, and she left it to me, and when someone tried to take it, I did not scream or collapse. I got quiet. I got organized. And I got it back. Tell me, was justice served, or should there have been consequences far greater than this?